Captain Marcus Thornfield had served the kingdom of Eldoria for 15 years, but he had never felt the weight of responsibility as heavily as he did that cold October morning. The autumn mist clung to the castle walls of Ravenspire Palace like ghostly fingers, and somewhere within those ancient stones, 3 young lives hung in the balance. The royal children of King Edmund and Queen Isabella had become the center of a web of conspiracy that threatened to tear the kingdom apart. Prince Alexander, aged 12, was heir to the throne. His sister, Princess Sophia, was 10 years old with a spirit as fierce as her mother's. The youngest, Prince William, had just turned 8 and possessed an innocence that made Marcus's chest tighten with protective instinct. Marcus stood in the dim corridor outside the royal nursery wing, his hand resting on the pommel of his sword. The message that had reached him an hour before dawn still burned in his mind. A maid named Eleanor had slipped him a crumpled piece of parchment before disappearing back into the servant quarters. The words were simple but chilling. They planned to move tonight. The children are not safe. Trust no one in the inner circle. The captain's weathered face bore the scars of many battles. But this was different. This was not an enemy army approaching the gates or bandits in the forest. This threat came from within, from people who smiled at royal dinners and bowed with apparent respect. The thought made his stomach turn. As he walked the familiar corridors, Marcus reflected on the recent changes in the palace. 3 weeks ago, Duke Reginald Blackwood had arrived with his retinue for what was supposed to be a routine diplomatic visit. The Duke was King Edmund's cousin, a man who had always harbored resentment about being third in line to the throne. With his sharp features and cold gray eyes, Blackwood had never hidden his ambition well. But it wasn't just the Duke who concerned Marcus. Lady Victoria Ashford, the children's governess, had been acting strangely. She had been with the royal family for 2 years, coming highly recommended from the noble Ashford family. Recently, though, Marcus had noticed her whispering with unfamiliar servants and asking unusual questions about the children's daily routines. The captain paused outside the great hall where he could hear the sound of morning preparations. Servants hurried about their duties, but Marcus watched each face carefully. Who among them could be trusted? Who might be part of whatever plot was unfolding? His thoughts were interrupted by the sound of children's laughter echoing from the garden courtyard. Through the tall windows he could see the 3 royal children playing with their wooden swords, supervised by Sir Thomas Hartwell, one of the younger knights. Prince Alexander was teaching his siblings a complex sword technique, his serious expression making him look older than his 12 years. Princess Sophia, with her golden curls flying behind her, was determined to master every move her brother showed her. She had inherited her father's stubborn streak and her mother's quick wit. Prince William, meanwhile, was more interested in the butterflies that fluttered around the garden, though he gamely tried to follow along with the lesson. Marcus smiled despite his worries. These children represented the future of Eldoria, and he would die before allowing harm to come to them. But how could he protect them when he wasn't sure who the enemy was? The previous evening, Marcus had attended a meeting of the King's Council. Duke Blackwood had been there, of course, along with Lord Chancellor Harrison, General Patterson, and several other high-ranking officials. They had discussed matters of trade and border security, but Marcus had noticed something troubling. Every time the conversation turned to the succession or the children's education, Duke Blackwood's eyes would glitter with an intensity that made Marcus uneasy. After the meeting, Marcus had lingered in the shadows of the corridor and overheard a hushed conversation between the Duke and an unfamiliar man dressed in merchant's clothing. He couldn't make out all the words, but he heard enough to alarm him. Midnight, North Tower, and most disturbing of all, the children must not reach their majority. That phrase had haunted Marcus through the sleepless night. In Eldoria's law, a royal heir could not be challenged for the throne once they reached their 15th birthday. Prince Alexander would reach that age in less than 3 years. If something were to happen to King Edmund before then, and if Alexander were somehow removed from succession, the crown would pass to the next adult male heir, Duke Blackwood. Marcus had served under 3 kings, and he understood palace politics better than most. Ambitious nobles had always schemed for power. But this felt different, more urgent, more dangerous. The morning sun climbed higher, and Marcus made his way to the armory. He needed to speak with Sir Geoffrey Morland, the head of palace security. Geoffrey was a gruff, honest man who had served the royal family for 20 years. If anyone could be trusted, it was him. He found Geoffrey examining the duty rosters for the week. The older man looked up as Marcus approached, his bushy eyebrows raising in question. "Something's wrong, Geoffrey," Marcus said without preamble. "I think the royal children are in danger." Geoffrey set down the parchment and studied Marcus's face. "Tell me everything." Marcus related the events of the past few days, the strange behavior of Lady Ashford, Duke Blackwood's suspicious conversations, and most importantly, Eleanor's warning. Geoffrey listened without interruption, his expression growing darker with each detail. "I've had my own concerns," Geoffrey admitted when Marcus finished. "2 nights ago, I caught someone trying to access the old servant tunnels that run beneath the children's wing. When I challenged them, they claimed to be checking for rats, but—" He shook his head. Something didn't feel right. The 2 men looked at each other, understanding passing between them. They were dealing with a conspiracy that ran deeper than either had initially suspected. "We need to increase security around the children without alarming them," Marcus said. "And we need to identify everyone involved before they can act." "Agreed," Geoffrey nodded. "But we'll need help. Sir Thomas is completely loyal. We can bring him in. And there's a group of younger guards who've served faithfully. They're not part of the old noble networks." As they began to plan, Marcus felt a chill run down his spine. Time was running short, and he still didn't know the full extent of the plot. Were they planning to kidnap the children, or was something even worse in store? The sound of hoofbeats in the courtyard caught their attention. Through the window, they could see a messenger arriving at full gallop, his horse lathered with sweat. The man wore no identifying colors, and he headed straight for the guest quarters where Duke Blackwood was staying. "That's the same messenger who arrived 2 days ago," Geoffrey observed grimly. "Always goes straight to the Duke." Marcus watched the man dismount and hurry inside. Whatever message he carried, it was clearly urgent. The captain's instincts told him that events were accelerating. The conspirators were receiving new instructions, and time was running out. "We need to act today," Marcus said, his hand unconsciously moving to his sword hilt. "Tonight might be too late." As if summoned by his thoughts, Lady Ashford appeared in the courtyard below, walking purposefully toward the main castle. She carried herself differently today. There was a tension in her shoulders, a quickness to her step that suggested barely controlled excitement or fear. "Follow her," Geoffrey suggested quietly. "I'll organize our trusted men and brief them on the situation. We'll create a protective perimeter around the children without making it obvious." Marcus nodded and slipped from the armory, keeping to the shadows as he tracked Lady Ashford through the castle corridors. She moved with the confidence of someone familiar with the layout, taking several turns that led away from the children's quarters and toward the older sections of the castle. She finally stopped at a heavy wooden door that Marcus recognized as the entrance to the castle's archive chambers. These rooms were rarely used, filled with old documents and forgotten treasures from previous reigns. It was the perfect place for a clandestine meeting. Marcus positioned himself behind a stone pillar where he could observe without being seen. Within minutes, 2 figures approached the archive chambers. One was the mysterious messenger who had just arrived. The other was someone Marcus hadn't expected to see. Sir Roderick Vale, one of the king's trusted advisors. The sight of Sir Roderick hit Marcus like a physical blow. The man had been present when Marcus had taken his oath of service 15 years ago. He had dined at the captain's table, had been a guest at his wedding. The betrayal cut deep. The 3 conspirators disappeared into the archives, and Marcus crept closer, hoping to overhear their conversation. The thick stone walls muffled most sounds, but he managed to catch fragments of their discussion. "Tonight as planned." Lady Ashford's voice was barely audible. "The king will be hunting until evening." This from Sir Roderick. "Children must be secured before midnight." The messenger's words were clearer, his voice carrying an authority that suggested he was more than just a courier. Marcus's blood ran cold. Whatever they were planning, it would happen that very night while King Edmund was away on his weekly hunting expedition. The children would be more vulnerable with their father absent from the castle. He had heard enough. Moving carefully to avoid detection, Marcus made his way back to find Geoffrey and set their own plans in motion. The game of cat and mouse was about to begin, and the stakes couldn't be higher. As he hurried through the corridors, Marcus thought about the 3 innocent children playing in the garden, unaware that their lives hung in the balance. Prince Alexander with his serious demeanor and strong sense of duty, Princess Sophia with her bright laugh and fierce determination, little Prince William with his gentle nature and curious mind. The captain's jaw tightened with resolve. He had sworn an oath to protect the royal family with his life, and he intended to honor that oath. The conspirators had made one crucial mistake. They had underestimated the loyalty and determination of those who truly served the crown. The battle for the future of Eldoria was about to begin, and Marcus Thornfield would not yield an inch. The afternoon sun cast long shadows across the castle grounds as Marcus assembled his trusted allies in the old watchtower. The circular room had once served as a lookout point during the kingdom's more violent past, but now it provided the perfect place for a secret meeting. Geoffrey Morland stood near the narrow window, keeping watch for any approaching figures, while Sir Thomas Hartwell paced restlessly near the ancient stone walls. "How many others are involved?" Sir Thomas asked, his young face creased with worry. At 26, he was one of the youngest knights ever appointed to guard the royal children, but his loyalty was absolute. Marcus had watched him risk his own safety countless times to protect Prince Alexander, Princess Sophia, and Prince William during their outdoor adventures. "That's what we need to find out," Marcus replied grimly. "So far, we've identified Lady Ashford, Duke Blackwood, Sir Roderick, and this mysterious messenger. But a plot this complex requires more people, servants with access, guards who can be bribed or threatened, perhaps even kitchen staff." Geoffrey turned from the window, his weathered face grim. "I've been thinking about the servant tunnels. If someone's been mapping them out, they could move through the castle without being seen by regular patrols. Those passages connect to almost every major room, including the children's quarters." The revelation sent a chill through the small group. The servant tunnels were a relic from the castle's original construction, designed to allow staff to move between floors without disturbing the noble families. Most of the current servants used only the main passages, leaving the older tunnels largely forgotten and unguarded. "We need to block those access points," Marcus decided. "But, carefully, we can't let them know we're onto their plan." Sir Thomas stopped pacing and looked directly at Marcus. "What exactly do you think they're planning? Kidnapping? Or—" He couldn't bring himself to speak the darker possibility aloud. Marcus had been wrestling with the same question all morning. If they just wanted to remove the children from succession, there are less risky ways than murder. False accusations, exile, even arranging accidents during hunting trips or riding lessons. But this feels more immediate, more desperate. "Unless," Geoffrey said slowly, "they're not planning to kill the children outright. What if they're planning to make them disappear? Take them somewhere remote, claim they were kidnapped by bandits or foreign agents." The possibility hung in the air like a dark cloud. A successful kidnapping would throw the kingdom into chaos. King Edmund would be forced to focus all his resources on finding his children, leaving the government vulnerable. Duke Blackwood could position himself as a stabilizing influence, gradually accumulating power while the search continued. If the children simply vanished, Marcus continued the thought, Blackwood could eventually claim the throne, arguing that presumed dead heirs cannot rule. He'd appear reluctant to take power, making his eventual succession seem legitimate. A soft knock on the tower door interrupted their discussion. Marcus drew his sword silently, motioning for the others to take positions on either side of the entrance. The knock repeated, 3 short taps, followed by 2 longer ones. It was Eleanor, the maid who had warned Marcus that morning. Geoffrey opened the door carefully, and the young woman slipped inside. Her face was pale, and her hands shook as she clutched a bundle of cleaning rags, her excuse for being in this part of the castle. "I have more information," she whispered, glancing nervously toward the stairs. "I overheard Lady Ashford talking to one of the new kitchen maids. They're planning to drug the children's evening meal, something to make them sleep deeply. The plan is to move them during the night shift change when the corridors are less watched." Marcus felt his heart sink. Eleanor's information confirmed their worst fears and added new urgency to their situation. "How many people are involved?" he asked. "At least 6 that I've seen," Eleanor replied. "Lady Ashford, obviously. 2 of the newer kitchen maid's sisters who arrived last month. A stable boy named Henrik who's been asking strange questions about the guard schedules. And," she hesitated, clearly troubled by what she was about to reveal. "Tell us," Geoffrey encouraged gently. "Master Collins, the children's music teacher. I saw him passing notes to Lady Ashford yesterday evening. He's been giving the children extra lessons this week, keeping them occupied while..." She couldn't finish the sentence. Sir Thomas slammed his fist against the stone wall. "Collins has been with the royal family for 3 years. The children trust him completely." Marcus understood his anger, but they needed to stay focused. This actually works in our favor. If we know who's involved, we can watch them and potentially turn their plan against them. "What do you mean?" Geoffrey asked. "We let them think their plan is succeeding," Marcus explained, his mind racing through possibilities. "We control what the children eat tonight, make sure they're not drugged. We substitute our own people for some of their conspirators, and we follow them to see where they planned to take the children." Eleanor shifted nervously. "There's something else. I heard them mention a ship waiting at Greystone Harbor. That's 3 hours' ride from here. They have everything prepared for a long journey." The pieces of the puzzle were falling into place, and the picture they formed was even more disturbing than Marcus had imagined. This wasn't a simple palace coup. It was an elaborate kidnapping plot with international implications. Greystone Harbor served merchant ships from several kingdoms, including some that were not particularly friendly to Eldoria. "They're planning to take the children out of the kingdom entirely," Marcus realized aloud. "Once they're across the border, finding them becomes nearly impossible." Geoffrey nodded grimly, and King Edmund would be forced to negotiate from a position of weakness. Depending on which kingdom is harboring them, Blackwood might be able to arrange a very favorable deal for himself. The scope of the conspiracy was staggering. This wasn't just about royal succession, it was about the future independence of Eldoria itself. Marcus felt the weight of responsibility settling on his shoulders like a lead cloak. "We need to warn the king," Sir Thomas said urgently. Marcus shook his head. "Edmund is deep in the forest on his hunting expedition, and we don't know how far this conspiracy reaches. Anyone we send as a messenger might be working for Blackwood. By the time we could reach the king and return with help, the children would be long gone." "So what do we do?" Eleanor asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Marcus looked at each of his allies in turn. Geoffrey, with his 20 years of faithful service and unquestioned loyalty. Sir Thomas, young but brave and completely devoted to the royal children. Eleanor, a serving maid who was risking everything to do what was right. It wasn't much of an army, but it would have to be enough. "We stop them ourselves," Marcus said simply. "Tonight." The plan they developed over the next hour was risky, but it was their only option. Eleanor would return to her duties and keep watching the conspirators, looking for any last-minute changes to their plan. Geoffrey would quietly position trusted guards at strategic points throughout the castle, making sure they appeared to be following normal patrol routes. Sir Thomas would stay close to the children, finding excuses to remain in their quarters later than usual. Marcus would handle the most dangerous part, intercepting the drugged food and replacing it with harmless alternatives. He would also need to identify which servants were truly loyal and could be trusted to help versus those who might be working for the conspiracy.
As the group prepared to leave the tower, Eleanor grabbed Marcus's arm.
"Captain," she said urgently, "there's one more thing. I heard Lady Ashford mention something about the signal from the North Tower. I think they're coordinating with people outside the castle." Marcus felt a new chill of fear. If the conspirators had allies positioned outside the castle walls, the situation was even more complex than he had imagined. It also meant that even if they stopped the kidnapping attempt, they might still face an external assault. "How many people do you think are out there?" Geoffrey asked. "I don't know," Eleanor replied. "But I heard horses in the forest last night, moving in organized groups, more than just travelers or merchants." The implications were clear. Duke Blackwood had prepared for multiple contingencies. If the kidnapping plot failed, he might be ready to take the castle by force. Either way, he would achieve his goal of removing the children from succession and positioning himself for the throne. As the afternoon wore on, Marcus moved through the castle like a man walking on thin ice. Every conversation felt potentially dangerous. Every smile might hide betrayal. He watched the kitchen staff carefully, noting which ones seemed nervous or overly interested in the children's meal preparations. The royal family's head cook, Master Bradley, had served the castle for 15 years and had always been completely reliable. Marcus approached him carefully, testing his loyalty with subtle questions about the evening meal. Bradley's responses convinced Marcus that the cook was not part of the conspiracy, but he might unknowingly be working with compromised assistants. "The children have requested extra honey cakes tonight," Marcus lied smoothly. I'd like to supervise their preparation personally, given the recent security concerns. Bradley raised an eyebrow, but nodded agreeably. Of course, Captain. Though I should mention, Lady Ashford specifically requested that the children's evening tea be prepared by the new kitchen maids. She said it was part of their training. Marcus's suspicions were confirmed. The conspiracy was moving forward exactly as Eleanor had warned. I think we should change those arrangements, he said carefully. Given the Duke's visit, security protocols require that all royal meals be prepared only by senior staff. The cook looked confused but agreed. Marcus knew he was taking a risk by disrupting their plan, but he couldn't allow the children to be drugged, even if it meant alerting the conspirators to his awareness. As evening approached, Marcus positioned himself where he could observe the main corridors leading to the royal quarters. He watched as Lady Ashford moved through the castle with barely concealed excitement, clearly anticipating the success of their plot. Master Collins arrived for what was supposed to be an evening music lesson with the children, carrying his usual leather satchel of sheet music. Sir Roderick Vale made his appearance shortly before dinner, speaking in hushed tones with Duke Blackwood near the main hall. Both men kept glancing toward the children's wing, and Marcus could see the tension in their postures. The messenger who had arrived that morning was nowhere to be seen, which worried Marcus considerably. Had he already departed for Greystone Harbor to ensure the ship was ready? Or was he positioned somewhere else in the castle, waiting to play his role in the evening's events? As the castle prepared for the evening meal, Marcus felt like a chess player who could see several moves ahead, but still wasn't certain of victory. The conspirators had spent weeks preparing their plan, while he'd had only hours to organize a defense. Everything would depend on precise timing and the loyalty of people he hoped he could trust. The sun began to set over the kingdom of Eldoria, painting the sky in shades of orange and red that reminded Marcus uncomfortably of blood. Somewhere in the castle, 3 innocent children were about to sit down for what the conspirators intended to be their last meal in their family home. Marcus checked his sword one final time and began moving toward the royal dining chamber. The battle for Eldoria's future was about to begin. The royal dining chamber glowed warmly in the candlelight as Prince Alexander, Princess Sophia, and Prince William took their seats at the smaller family table reserved for informal meals. Without King Edmund and Queen Isabella present, the Queen was visiting her sister in the neighboring duchy. The evening meal would be a simple affair. Lady Ashford stood nearby, her face composed but her eyes bright with anticipation that made Marcus's skin crawl. Children, Master Collins will be joining you for dinner tonight, Lady Ashford announced, her voice carrying just a hint of the excitement she was trying to suppress. He has some wonderful new pieces he'd like to teach you after the meal. Marcus watched from his position near the chamber's entrance, every sense alert for signs of the conspiracy in motion. Master Collins smiled warmly at the children, but the captain noticed how the music teacher's hands trembled slightly as he arranged his sheet music on a side table. Prince Alexander, ever observant for his 12 years, seemed to sense something unusual in the atmosphere. Will father be returning tonight? He asked, looking directly at Lady Ashford. I'm afraid the hunting party was delayed, she replied smoothly, but he sent word that he wants you all to get extra rest tonight. You have early lessons tomorrow. Princess Sophia, her golden curls catching the candlelight, wrinkled her nose in disappointment. But we wanted to show him the new sword technique Sir Thomas taught us today. You'll have plenty of time for that tomorrow, Master Collins interjected, his voice perhaps a bit too hearty. Tonight, let's focus on music. I have some beautiful lullabies that might help you sleep peacefully. The mention of sleep and lullabies sent alarm bells ringing in Marcus's mind. Every word seemed carefully chosen to reinforce the idea of rest and unconsciousness. He caught Sir Thomas's eye from across the room and saw his own concern reflected there. The kitchen doors opened and the evening meal was served. Marcus watched carefully as each dish was presented. True to his word, Master Bradley had personally prepared everything, with no involvement from the suspicious new kitchen maids. But Marcus noticed how Lady Ashford's face tightened with displeasure when she realized the food wasn't being served by the usual evening staff. Where are the girls who usually serve the children's meals? She asked Master Bradley with forced casualness. Captain Thornfield requested that senior staff handle all royal service tonight, Bradley replied, apparently unaware of the undercurrents swirling around him. Something about security protocols during Duke Blackwood's visit. Lady Ashford's eyes flicked toward Marcus, and for just a moment he saw her mask slip. There was fury there, and growing suspicion. She was beginning to realize that her carefully laid plans might be compromised. The children began eating, chattering about their day's activities. Prince William entertained his siblings with a story about a butterfly that had landed on his sword during practice, complete with dramatic gestures that made Princess Sophia giggle. Prince Alexander listened with the indulgent smile of an older brother, but Marcus could see him glancing occasionally at the adults in the room, clearly sensing the tension. "Lady Ashford," Princess Sophia said suddenly, "you seem worried about something. Are you feeling well?" The governess forced a bright smile. "I'm perfectly fine, dear. Just thinking about tomorrow's lessons." Master Collins cleared his throat nervously. "Speaking of which, perhaps we should begin our music session as soon as you finish eating. I have some pieces that are best learned in the evening, when the mind is relaxed and ready for sleep." Again with the emphasis on sleep and relaxation. Marcus made a subtle hand signal to Sir Thomas, who immediately moved closer to the children's table, ostensibly to help Prince William with cutting his meat. "I'm not really tired tonight," Prince Alexander said, his tone carefully neutral. "Perhaps we could work on something more energetic. Father has been teaching me about battle songs and military marches." Master Collins's smile became strained. "Oh, but evening is the time for gentle music, Your Highness."
I see your son and your sister.
"Loud, martial music can overstimulate the mind and make sleep difficult. I don't want to sleep early tonight," Princess Sophia declared with the stubbornness her parents knew well. "I want to practice my sword work some more." Lady Ashford and Master Collins exchanged a quick glance that confirmed Marcus's worst fears. They were growing desperate, their careful psychological preparation crumbling as the children resisted the suggestions that were supposed to make them compliant and drowsy. "Children," Lady Ashford said, her voice taking on a firmer tone, "you will follow the evening schedule as planned. Music lessons, then immediate rest. Your parents have left specific instructions." Prince Alexander's expression sharpened. At 12, he had already developed some political instincts, and something in Lady Ashford's manner clearly struck him as wrong. "I'd like to verify those instructions with Sir Geoffrey," he said politely but firmly. "As future king, I should understand the chain of command during father's absence." The simple request hung in the air like a challenge. Lady Ashford's face flushed, and Marcus could see her struggling to maintain her composure.